Welcome to Teaching Artist Podcast, a show dedicated to discussions of teaching art to kids, making art, and how those things overlap and feed each other. I'm Rebecca Potts, your host, a visual arts teaching artist.
It was so great to reconnect with Reuben. I worked with him 10 years ago when I managed art education programs at the Bronx River Art Center. He was an incredible teaching artist there, teaching workshops in the center and in schools. I loved hearing more of his background and how he's worked his way into his dream of having his own teaching studio. Reuben now owns Brooklyn Clay Industries, where he offers his own classes, manages other teaching artists, offers production services, and creates his own artwork. He shared some of the business side of this venture, which is so helpful to hear. I'm always grateful when artists open up about their struggles and share more details of their successes. Reuben King has been a ceramic artist and art teacher for over 25 years. He was born and raised on the Caribbean island of Dominica, where his art education began at Marigot Arts and Crafts Institute. He studied at the Jamaica School of Art, the Caribbean's only formal arts institution. His fine work and command of the material won him a scholarship to study design at the State Institute of Art in Naples and Florence, Italy. He has also taken several professional development courses at New York University, Lincoln Center, and several museums. Reuben has maintained a personal pottery and ceramic studio at the historic Brooklyn Navy Yard for over a decade and founded Brooklyn Clay Industries there. The mission of Brooklyn Clay Industries is to encourage people of all ages to develop their full creative potential, mostly through pottery, ceramics, and sculpture. They are raising the profile of the ceramic arts, supporting the development of ceramic artists, and bringing the joy of the arts to our most underserved communities. Brooklyn Clay Industries provides a professional work environment that is rewarding, creative, and respectful of ideas and individuals. Through Brooklyn Clay Industries, Reuben is dedicated to providing an affordable, fully equipped and functioning artist studio and gallery that can be shared and appreciated by all. Now let's get into our conversation. So I am here talking to Reuben King, who is an amazing ceramicist that I got to work with many years ago. And Reuben, I like to start just kind of getting a little bit of background. So could you kind of walk us through your story? Like, how did you become an artist and then also a teacher?
Okay.
And which one comes first?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rebecca. Thank you for having me on.
Yes.
Yeah. It was wonderful working with you many years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm originally from the Caribbean, and as a child, I always loved drawing and painting, and I loved looking at art in magazines at the time. Because we were a small island in the Caribbean, so we didn't have access to, great museums with wonderful, fine works of art. We did have some awesome local artists that I admired.
Yeah.
One of them was actually one of my instructors in high school, and he was very inspiring and actually helped me really, in a sense, decide rather that I wanted to be an artist. Although I wasn't quite sure, but I had a really great pull towards the arts, visual arts, and also performing arts. I actually liked music, playing music, singing, and so on. And so at the first opportunity, I actually got right into it. I had an opportunity to go to an art program in Dominica at the time, and it was actually my community, so it was really good for me in that regard. And there I learned pottery, and at the time we also learned a few other creative art forms as well, crafting. And from there, I actually continued my studies by going to Jamaica, did some programs in Jamaica towards my bachelor's degree, and continued in Italy for the last year of my program I was lucky enough to study in Florence.
Ah, beautiful.
Yeah, that was a wonderful experience. I did finish up my degree there, and from there, from Italy, I actually came here because I wanted to actually be able to practice and really exercise and learn more, including practicing the things that I actually learned in my last year in Italy. In Italy, my focus was design and production design, and so knowing I wouldn't have had so much access, but materials, maybe more experienced or other experienced artists with the skills that I learned there that I could actually learn from. I decided to come to New York to study some more, to help me translate some of that information that I picked up and really practice a bit more extensively. So that's basically how I got into it. I used to always love to go through magazines with art published in them. I remember the Reader's Digest. I'm probably dating myself here, but this old magazine called Reader's Digest would very often feature really amazing art and handmade works. And that was I'd always be very excited about going through those pages and, imagining that I was one of the artists producing those fine works. And so I, just continued to practice and came here and worked with, since my main interest was pottery and ceramics, I found myself a job with a ceramic supply store in the city, which was really amazing in terms of the whole experience. I have a little story around that job that I often like to share because I find it really fascinating. So I was really interested because before I actually came here, I had a plan. So one of my plans really was to try to work with at a ceramic supply store, and in the process actually, get to meet other potters, but most of all have the opportunity to be able to purchase the equipment and tools and materials that I ultimately would have taken back with me to Dominica. Because my plan really wasn't to stay. So it was supposed to be temporary. Of course, some 30 years later, here I am. But so I went to the store. In fact, I went through local newspaper at the time. I think it was the Village Voice, which I don't think is in existence anymore in the city. And so I decided I'm not sure why I chose the Voice, but I grabbed the Voice.
Yeah.
And as I was, I decided to check out the Help Wanted section. And sure enough, there was an ad I think they were looking for someone to help with stocking and so on, cleaning.
Right.
And thought, wow, here's my opportunity. So I jumped at it right away, made a call, went down to the store for an interview. And by the time I got there, somebody had already gotten the job.
Oh, no.
So of course I was very disappointed. And so, but I was still hopeful. So I stuck around a little while. And then I continued my search for a job because I needed one at the time.
Yeah.
But I think I found a job at a supermarket at the time, working at nights. And one fateful night, I was actually returning home from work, and it was very late. In fact, I think I worked from something like 4 to midnight or something like that. And so I was heading home to Queens on the subway one night, and I happened to be sharing the subway car with another young gentleman. And, we were almost sitting across from each other. So we started talking because we were the only two people in the car. It was well after midnight, maybe 12:30. And so we struck up a conversation, and it turned out that he was also an artist. So he asked me what I did, what type of work I did, and so on. So I went on to explain that I was a ceramic artist and I was a potter and so on and so on. So he looked at me and with some excitement in his eyes, and he was like, yeah, and it's because I actually told him that I was looking for work in my field, and I went to this supply store and to get a job and so on. Because I think he asked me what I did, and I told him I was working with a supermarket, but I was actually looking to work with the ceramic supply store, which was, I think, one of the only ones in town at the time. I think there were a couple of them. There was one in Brooklyn. So he looked at me with some astonishment, and he said, well, you would not believe this, but I just quit this job at Ceramic Supplies, New York and New Jersey, which was the exact place where I had actually gone to apply. And it was the job that I had applied for.
Wow.
This was the guy who had actually gotten the job. That that I had applied for. And here he was telling me, because for many weeks I thought, well, maybe I should, there was a nagging feeling that I should call them up, just to check in, see if anything opened up. Or my plan was also to go down there. There was a notice board. My plan was to actually go, post a little notice to see whether there were any potters looking for some assistance, because I was really itching to get back clay and get some work done. So he dropped that on me that night, and I was just stunned, because it was just fate, just one of those really amazing manifestations. So he was like, you better get down there, first thing tomorrow and try to get that job, Sure enough, I did. And I got down there and I did get the job, ended up sticking around there for about 11 years.
Wow.
Before long, I became the manager and I was running the place. And it also afforded me the opportunity to accomplish my goal, which was to buy equipment and supplies and tools and so on.
Right.
So by the end of my tenure there, I actually moved all of my equipment, because I bought most of the equipment they had in their studio on closing, because the store actually closed. Left New York City and moved to New Jersey, which they still are, where they still are right now. And in the process, I actually bought the studio that existed there. So there was a retail store, and in the basement there was a pottery studio where they offered classes. In fact, I actually taught classes there for many years as well. So I was able to buy the equipment, all of it, pretty much, or most of it, and I moved it all to a location in Williamsburg and proceeded to set up a studio there.
Amazing. Yes. And was that store the first place that you started teaching? Was that kind of how you got into teaching as well?
Yes. Well, it's partly, actually, I actually started to teach at that store. But before I actually left Dominica, after I graduated my initial 2-year program, I did a little teaching on site, at the same school for a short period before I actually left to go off to study. So I actually did a little teaching there first. But yes, once I got to the city and worked with the store, I actually, became a much more serious pottery teacher at that location. And of course, once I moved, my plan was always to actually set up a similar project on my own. Right. That's one of the reasons I actually bought all of the equipment, which I actually did for a short period. I set up had one of those. They're pretty common now, a ceramic studio, which I was able to share with a few other potters at the time, and where I offered classes briefly. Unfortunately, the studio had to shut it down because the landlord was not very, very kind, and he did not hold his end of the bargain. And it was one of the coldest winters we had seen in New York for a very, very long time, in the early to mid 90s. And so I was forced to leave the location because our heat situation was really horrible. The landlord refused to repair the windows, and it was so cold. It was just impossible to do pottery there. With pottery, you need a warm space in the winter, because the clay absorbs a lot of chill and it goes onto it, so as you can imagine, when we come to work, after a freezing night, clay would be so cold that we could hardly do anything with it. Buckets of water freezing in the space. It was just horrible. It was horrible. Yeah, exactly.
Like so
frozen slip. Was quite unfortunate. We had to actually get out of there and move temporarily to a space right across from the Navy Yard that I shared with a friend who was also a ceramic artist and sculptor. And then shortly after that, we got an opportunity to move to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, where we actually moved. I moved all of my equipment, stuff that I still had that I didn't get rid of, and stayed there until now, actually. We've been there now for at least 25 years already. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And you've had some transitions there as well. I know when I got to visit you, it was more like your personal studio. You weren't teaching there yet.
Yes. So up till about 3-4 years ago, I used it as my personal studio. So I used it for producing my own work. And about 4 or 5 years ago, there was this big transition in the teaching artist environment in the city. A lot of the nonprofits that I worked with, at the time, we're losing funding, including our beloved Bronx River Art Center.
Oh.
And so there was a lot of cutbacks,
Yeah.
and it was really difficult to function as a teaching artist, at least for me. I always love to try to balance being able to do my own work and doing some teaching at the same time to sort of help offset some of my bills. But also, you know, always got great satisfaction out of teaching in general, whether kids or adults.
Yeah.
So that sort of was one of the motivators. Of course, there was a lot of changes also happening at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. There's a lot of development and upgrading of the yard happening. And I thought it was also a great opportunity to, you know, take advantage of being there and participating in some of those changes and developments.
Yeah. And so now you run Brooklyn Clay Industries.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And what kind of classes do you teach there? And do you have other teachers as well working for you?
I do have at least 2 other instructors right now. And hopefully we're actually thinking or in the process of expanding a little bit.
Ooh.
It's a little crazy considering all that's happening. But it was always part of the plan, and the space became available right in the middle of the pandemic. So we decided to jump on it. And the advantage to that also is that it also helps us to continue with all classes, but to allow for more distance between students.
Right.
Because in the past, you know, in my smaller space, we'd sort of really pack them in, you know, the classes were very popular.
Right.
And so we would, you know, within reason, you know, we'd have a larger group of 10 to 12 for the wheel classes, and sometimes up to 17 or 18 for hand building classes. But with the pandemic, we had to do a lot of spacing. So currently we can only do about seven in our wheel classes, and we've suspended our hand building classes for now. We opened up about 2 weeks ago again after the shutdown. Yeah. So we've been, you know, experimenting and trying new things in order to try to stay afloat and keep the project going and studio open and available.
Right.
Yeah. So we're going to actually do this expansion in the midst of all of this madness. And hopefully it'll help us survive by being able to, you know, have more space in order to be able to accommodate a few more people, which will make it a bit more viable for us to operate.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure how long we can continue with teaching only 6 persons at a time, 6 or 7. So the larger space will actually help us to operate at a slightly larger capacity. We certainly won't go beyond 10 in each class, but at least we'll have a lot more space. We'll be able to spread out a bit more, and people will feel more comfortable doing that.
Yeah. And with Brooklyn Clay Industries, do you work with the schools at all anymore?
Very rarely. Yeah. I've been really just focused on Brooklyn Clay Industries for now. Of course, I do have an open invitation to, I hope, as far as I know, to Bronx River Art Center. They would love for me to come back and do some teaching, but I've just been so focused on getting this project going that
it's a lot.
Yes, I had to really put my full attention to it. So I had to take a break from there. I still assist with, you know, things like repairs and so on at the center, but I haven't been teaching.
Right.
And I've also pulled back from some of my other programs. I did some museum programs and some community centers and so on over the years. And so a lot of those programs got cut back.
Right.
And as they got cut back, I just, you know, realized I should just do my own thing, which has always been the plan. So those projects cutting back just really motivated me to get my own project going.
Yeah. And then do you still fit in time to keep making your own work?
Indeed. Yes. And even at this time in particular, I have been putting some more time into that. Of course, I've had more time available to me with the virus slowing everything slowing down.
Yeah.
So part of the adjustment really is actually being able to produce more of my own work,
right,
which I can use for presenting or for selling.
mm-hmm.
I help to support the studio. And so I'm spending more time producing pottery, and hopefully we'll also be able to, in fact, I have started a couple other little projects, experimental projects. With all that's happening now this year, I'm certainly inspired to create some works to reflect the time.
And would you mind talking more about that and sort of what projects you have going? And
I was thinking of, for some time now, I've been thinking about doing a series of pieces with images on them that reflect, some of the, especially the protests right now and the brutality of Black bodies and so on.
Yeah.
So I've been planning a project for a while now to reflect some of that in my work.
Yeah.
And so I've been giving it more thought and doing some sketching and so on. And I'm actually going to start doing some actual building in the coming weeks around that. So I'll do a series of pots that will have some functionality as well, but they'll be reflecting some of the struggle that's been happening.
Yeah.
And I intend also to do a series that will reflect what's happening with the pandemic and how we're dealing with it. Yeah, so they're pretty much along those veins. I actually plan to do some sculpture as well. And I've been planning to do an installation that I'm still kind of sorting out in my mind.
Yeah.
So that should be interesting. I have a good idea as to what it's going to be, but I'm not at liberty to share just yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully people come through and check our website and see, catch up with it.
Yeah. We'll have to keep checking back to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's coming soon.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to ask you, and then you mentioned that there would be functionality, because I know a lot of your work is like there's this focus on this is a functional object that you can use, and it's also a beautiful work of art.
Right.
So I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's one of the things that I've always been really adamant about in terms of my work. I love the function of art. I love my art to have some sort of function as well as beauty, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, not everything is functional that I create. I do sculptures that are not non-functional at all.
Right.
But I always sort of try to incorporate some sort of functionality to my pieces, whether or not they use that way. Because some people actually buy my work and never really use them in there as they could be used, which is fine, but at least the option is there. It could be used for storage. It could be used to add more beauty or to incorporate as an installation by adding flowers in it and so on.
Yeah.
I see flowers, like a vase as an installation piece almost.
Right.
Where you can sort of use it as a base for creating interesting arrangements and so on.
Yeah.
That's basically how I think of my work. There are pieces, of course, that you can also use for eating or cooking, and they all have their own function, their own aesthetic in not only the surface design, but in the forms as well.
Yeah.
Form and function.
Right. Yeah. And then does your process usually start with sketching, or is it
not always?
Like what is your process?
It depends. It depends on the project. If it's something more of an installation nature, then I'll certainly sketch it beforehand. For certain individual pieces, I'll have an idea. I may do a cutout. So typically, as potters, instead of drawing an image, we cut it out.
Right.
I use like a sheet of paper, fold it in half, and then I basically cut out a shape. Or I also maybe trace the image on one side, so like half of the image is traced, and then cut it out, in the shape that I want, and then open it up, and I have a full shape.
Yeah.
So I usually do my sketching that way when it comes to creating my forms. That's basically how I sketch, by maybe doing a little tracing, or using scissors, using pair of scissors, just cutting out the shape that I envisioned. Yeah. And then I go right away to the wheel and start working it out.
Nice. Yeah. And then when you're thinking of adding the imagery on the clay, would that be with glazes, or would you be like carving into or even stenciling? Yeah.
Right. So there are many approaches I use. I've been using a technique called graffito quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
This graffito technique where I layer a few colors, at least 2 colors, usually contrasting colors, and then I'll sort of carve through the surface of the color on the top, or the layer of glaze on the top. I'll sort of scratch into it and scratch the images out of the usually a lighter color that's over a darker color.
Yeah.
And then in the firing process, it'll sometimes change a bit from my intended design or enhance it, So in some regards, I sort of give some control to the kiln. I have an intended design. Sometimes it comes out, the design may actually come out just the way I want it. Sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
And when it doesn't, I'm also fine with it. Unless it's a specific design that I'm really trying to get to, that I really need to have become more visible, then I'll repeat it. I'll do it again.
Right.
But whatever comes out of the kiln is its creation. So, I try not to be too much of a dictator as far as that is concerned. I always tell my students, when you do pottery, you have to be able to give up control. Once you put the pieces in the kiln, the heat in the kiln has its say, and so it's not always up to the potter. Although many of us actually make it part of our life's work to gain control of the glazes and to have them do exactly what we want them to do and so on. But every so often, the kiln has its way.
Yes. Surprises you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm always really excited to see, what I'm going to get. I'm not always completely... If I want full control, then I'll use materials that allow me full control. Yeah, because we have, we can use glazes or underglazes and so on that will actually stay exactly where you want them to.
Right.
We can use glazes or design glazes that will stay exactly where we want them to. So there are times when I'll do that if I'm going for a particular look or a particular design, and, those results are a lot more predictable. But some of my favorites are actually the ones that are not.
Yeah. It's almost more exciting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot more exciting when I come to the kiln. Like the day that we open that glaze kiln is always like Christmas, it's always like a special day.
Yeah.
Because the results, are unpredictable. So it's like a big surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember while I was at school, at college, it would always be one of those moments, so nobody would want to miss the opening of the kiln. If you miss the opening, then, you'd be really upset. Like if they got the kiln before you got there, because it was always interesting to see how the pieces, or to be one of the first persons to see the pieces come out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of printmaking, where there's that, you can have a lot of control, but you can also, there's like the magic of the press, and you
Absolutely.
are just kind of waiting for it to come out of there and like, what happened in that press?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, the kiln is the same way. And of course, there's sometimes some serious disappointments, that is also part of the process.
Right.
And so it could go from real disappointment to full amazing excitement and euphoria according to the results,
Yeah.
If a piece comes out really amazing, I mean, it's just like, wow,
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't stop looking at it.
And how did you kind of help kids, especially through that, when you were teaching more in the schools and working with younger students?
Yeah. So there's something about pottery, that's just, and ceramics, but that's so metaphoric, So there are a lot of metaphors that are always coming out based on the nature of clay and the things that we can do with it and so on. So I find myself using a lot of metaphors to sort of explain the process.
Right.
I think one of the things I always tell my students is, well, if you have issues with control, if you have issues with control and you like to control everything, you should do some pottery because it'll help you sort of release and relax around the control issues.
Yeah.
Especially since with pottery, it's a little more difficult to have full control. So I think it's a really great exercise and a great teacher in itself. There are just so many ways you learn while doing pottery. There are a lot of lessons that I've learned in the process.
Yeah. Oh. Thinking more about teaching a little bit, do you have like a favorite age level that you teach?
Yeah, well,
because I know now you're also teaching adults.
Adults,
well.
yes.
Yeah.
And that's actually a question I've grappled with myself for some time. I think I really like the young, maybe 5 to 10 age group, maybe even 11, 12, 13, maybe 14 sometimes. I've had some experiences, with that, like the middle school age group.
Yeah.
If they're not interested, it's really difficult to get them to focus.
Right.
But typically they're still very much interested. The same is true with older kids, high school age. If they're into it, you can get some really amazing work out of it. If they're not, then, you're going to have some problems. So one of the reasons I love the younger ages really is because of their interest. They're still very, they have no hang-ups around art. They don't feel like they're not talented. Like adults will say, oh, I have no artistic talent whatsoever, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Little kids will never say that. They come right into it. They can't wait to get into the clay. They can't wait although actually, to be fair, most age groups, but the younger ones in particular, are very open to art in general, and especially pottery. They really love pottery. They love to create three-dimensional forms. And in my experience, most kids actually do take a liking to pottery pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless, of course, they're at the age where they're trying to make sure their nails don't get scratched.
Yeah, it's not so good for fancy fingernails.
Exactly. That can be a problem.
Yeah. And with the kids, I know that you've kind of focused on like the technical, the craft. Do you also share artists with them or talk them through ideas and concepts in their work?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And how does that, what does that look like? What's your kind of approach?
Yeah. I think that's really important, especially if you're, you're working with them for an extended period of time.
Right.
I think it's really important.
Gets harder in like a one-day workshop.
Right. Yeah. One day you can still actually do it, especially if the project is based on the design style or so of a particular artist. You can actually still do it. Typically what I do some planning. I mean, for the most part, we always plan ahead. And so if I'm with a group for an extended period of time, I'll typically start off with like a PowerPoint presentation featuring the particular artist that we may use as our inspiration. And so I'll show the work of the artist and then show, of course, an image of the artist. And we'll have some discussions around whatever the subject matter is that we're about to use to help inform or inspire the project that we're working on. And in some cases, we'll even create the atmospheric condition, the ambience. There's some artists who love to create using music, including myself. And for an example, I used Reuben King. He was a great black collage artist who worked in Harlem for many years.
Right.
And he loved to create using jazz. So jazz music, we would in some cases create with jazz and a little jazz music in the background.
Yeah,
so we'd sort of, try to learn a little bit about the artist, what he liked to do, when he created or she, when the type of environment they create, because I think that's also important. The environment that's set for the process. And then we would, one of the things I also do if the kids are old enough, with older kids and adults, is I'll have them do a little research on their own. So I won't give them everything. I'll have them go, do a little research on the artist, on their work, and then come back with some information of their own.
Right.
And by the time that process is complete, then everyone sort of has a good sense for the artist and for the type of work they created and the ideas they try to put forward, and we'd sort of use them as inspiration, really, and not necessarily reproduce the work that they created, but, we'd use them as inspiration.
Right.
Because in my teaching, I didn't always do clay. There are times I do other mediums as well. We do some collage and some printing and so on. So according to the project, we'd sort of do a little research, a little exploration, and then we'd really get into it. We'd do some drawing, and then we would actually get into the project, using by then, we would sort of develop our own ideas and proceed from there.
Yeah. And what are some, I know you mentioned Romare Bearden. Are there any other kind of favorite artists that you have that you share with students?
There is Picasso, for instance, who was a very versatile artist. Didn't also only draw and paint, but he also did some ceramics. And very often, a lot of people don't know that Pablo Picasso actually did some pottery. And so when that information is brought forth, people are usually surprised. It's usually new information for them. And so he's an example of one artist. Another artist would be another Black artist who would sometimes feature be like Dred Scott. If you're familiar with his work, he does a lot of protest art and installations and so on. I kind of like that. And who else? We've used a lot of artists over the years. If we're talking about artists of color, Faith is another artist we feature from time to time, and a few others. Those are just a few that I can think of off the top of my head right now.
Yeah.
There's this artist who was very colorful. She died a few years, or was it last year? A couple of years ago. Her name was Camille Billups. She's very interesting. I met her when I worked with Ceramic Supplies of New York and New Jersey, and she would very often come in to buy supplies. She loved sculpture and she did some pottery and so on, but she was also, she was a visual artist, but she was also she did printmaking. She also did some acting, some filmmaking. And I think she was an author as well. So she was this really interesting character artist in the city. She was really very colorful. You could always recognize her on the street. She used like a lot of beads and feathers, and,
Oh, cool.
Yeah, with a lot of bright colors and stuff. So she was another interesting artist that we'd explore from time to time.
Nice. Yeah, and it's always interesting how the students respond to different artists and kind of which ones excite them. And yeah,
absolutely. And I think one of the reasons I like Camille was, she had that really, she was a very conscious, very serious at times artist. And I always wanted to actually bring her in, but never really got the opportunity to. But I would show pictures of her and stuff, and the kids would always think she was interesting in that way.
Yeah, and even just seeing the pictures of an artist, and especially, like you said, artists of color, Black artists, when you're working with kids of color and, Black kids, they need to see people who look like them.
I agree. I totally agree. And that's one of the reasons. We featured different artists, including some of the more well-known artists, many of them not alive, which the kids would probably have heard of.
Right.
So we would feature some of those, but we'd also try to always keep some artists of color in the picture to really help inspire them and help them understand that they too could become an amazing artist if they wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you also become, like, the teacher becomes an inspiration for them as well.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, absolutely.
Seeing the work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was always, I think that was always important to kind of show my work, right? So I would also give them a sense for of what I did and so on. And it was always part of my introduction to them, to kind of have them get to know me a bit. It always made life a lot easier in the classroom when they know you a little bit. I think they can relate a little better.
Yeah. I feel like it also builds a little bit of a relationship, some trust, but also they start to respect you when they see, this guy actually makes some cool things. Like, he's not just telling us this stuff.
Absolutely. And So I'd certainly always do that. I'd not only bring in photographs, but I'd always bring, a couple of pieces and I could show them a couple of my own pieces. So they could get a sense for my, that I was real and I was, I was actually a potter. And I wasn't just saying that. Kids can be very skeptical.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to often prove yourself to them, to really get their respect.
Right.
And so, that was always part of of my routine, getting to know.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm thinking again about like the work that you said is kind of incubating for you right now, thinking about work dealing with the protests and dealing with the pandemic. And curious if you've done like sort of more, I mean, I kind of hesitate to even call that political work because I don't think it should be like a political thing, but work that is, talking about current issues and like whether you would show that to students or talk with them about that.
I have in the past with certain age groups. Yeah. So it depends on the age group.
Yeah.
So usually the older kids from middle school up to high school level, and of course adults, we would do social justice issues. As you know, part of the program we did at the Bronx River Art Center very often was built around environmental issues, and so we would sometimes bring in maybe an urban planner and an environmentalist, and do collaborations and do projects that actually included not just, building a project with clay, but really understanding fully all of those different aspects, whether it's an urban issue around a community's layout, the way of layout of a community and how it affects the environment.
Yeah, like more environmental justice.
Right, environmental justice issues and so on. So we did a lot of those types of projects in the past. I remember doing some really cool projects with a Museum of Art and Design. We did some really cool outreach projects to some of the local schools, with some of the local schools. In fact, we're doing this particular project with some really, with what they considered the toughest kids. These were kids that were in some alternative school environments. They were often suspended from school because of behavioral issues. And we came up with a curriculum and a plan to work with them. So we did some projects like those around social justice and environmental justice and even just societal issues, issues that we actually would formulate plans to help them address some of the issues that they themselves were confronting, like homelessness, because a lot of these kids were, dealing with homeless issues or just issues around home and family, that they were kids that were not always very settled in their home environment. And so that translated into their schoolwork. And very often, once they had the exposure to art, and the ability to actually create art, actually we saw, some huge changes, in their behavior, at least around us. So we've used that in many ways, not only as a as a form of creativity, but also as therapy, that can be used as therapy as well. So very often I know that that's also part of the mix, that's what's happening. Even if we're inspiring to create, at the same time, we're helping some of these kids actually lighten some of their mental and psychological issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And giving them like a platform to
express,
process, and express.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I love that, being able to give them a way to talk about issues that they're dealing with that are really tough things, like really hard things for any kid to deal with. And they're still kids when they're 17.
I think that was actually one of that program was indeed one of my most rewarding programs, in a sense, programs that I taught, because I think that group, I've never seen a group of kids that needed art more. I mean, it was, really great therapy for them. Be able to come in there and just dive into a project, into the, creating these projects. We did some dioramas, and I remember one year that was just so engrossing. The kids just got so into it, And of course, once you get deep in your project, it's really hard to think about anything else, at least for that period. So they were able to, just forget, at least for a moment, and express and process, and it would sort of help them through. We would talk about some of the issues that they were dealing with, we'd sort of allow them to, because one of the things I always do at the end of a project is to, have the kids talk about it, kind of express and do their own sort of critique in a sense. And have them talk about each other's work, but also most of all talk about their work and what they really felt or what they were actually thinking about, what inspired the colors or the shapes or the positions that I try to always get into it with them in that way. It's a really great opportunity for them to get some stuff out that they wouldn't probably otherwise be able to get out. So I always thought of it as therapy.
It's amazing. Did you ever feel like in those critiques that sometimes did any of them struggle to put words to what they were expressing?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's always that struggle, and
I still have that struggle.
Exactly, we all do. And
that's why we're visual people.
Yeah, exactly, right. So God knows where it'd be if I didn't have that expression. That form of expression. So they sometimes we have to help them along, and that's one of the great things about those critiques. Is doing it as a group and always making sure that it's not a judgmental exercise, but rather just an opportunity to share.
Yeah, and that like helps build a community with the kids, within themselves that hopefully then lasts beyond that class.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
No doubt.
I did want to ask you maybe more about your own work, and especially I feel like a lot of other artists and maybe listeners will be curious about sort of the business side of things and how you sell your work and sort of how you've found opportunities over the years.
Good question, because it's something I think we never really get in art school.
Right.
I'm a big advocate for a course in selling and advertising and promoting, and it's interesting how when we go through art school, very often we sort of come out with I know I did kind of had this purist mindset of not wanting to reproduce or mass produce and sort of just have everything originally, made,
right,
and so on, which is fine, but not always very practical, right? So the artist who creates this beautiful painting could sell that painting for a certain sum, right? And if he just sold the painting for that sum and only sold all his original paintings only, then he would probably have a hard time making a living.
Right.
So the idea of being able to reproduce that original painting in some way, by having them probably printed, even if it's in a limited edition, that actually helps him to be able to sell, maybe even hold on to the original for a bit longer so he could get a better price for it.
Right.
So he doesn't have to sell it off right away to make, to be able to pay his bills and probably not
right.
get what he thinks it's worth. But with the ability to reproduce that original work, even in a limited edition, sort of allows him to be able to sell that painting many times over. So that's really, I think, a very important lesson for artists to know. The ability to, what do you sort of create as an original work and probably not reproduce as many, maybe in a limited form. And that goes particularly with pottery and ceramics.
And for ceramics, maybe this is just that I'm not a potter. Would that mean that you're you're kind of spending the time to design, like almost that the design is the original, and then you're making several of that. Like, how would reproduction work for?
Yeah. So it would be, well, it comes down to basically the pieces that are made by hand as opposed to the pieces that are made maybe in a mold, right?
Yeah.
So we can, that's where the reproduction happens usually.
Okay.
Or if the potter decides to sit down and make, 1,000 of the same thing, that's by hand, that's also being reproduced, which kind of, maybe may reduce some of the, the original, sort of like the limited edition value. Or you could have like handmade pieces that are made purely by hand, and that same design could be reproduced in a mold and probably sold for less.
Yeah.
Because if you can reproduce it in, at a larger scale, the reproduction process is actually a bit faster and will take less time. And so the potter can actually sell in mass that way. And then, there can be original works made by hand that he could probably fetch a little more for because of that handmade quality.
Yeah.
And of course, now it's so much easier to market works we produce. I remember, before the internet, the process would be a bit more daunting because we would be dependent on retailers or gallery owners to sell our work at a very big discount,
Right.
50% off, There are some cases where I saw, there's some galleries that were actually taking more than 50%.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but with the internet, we can basically have our own stores, our own online stores, and we can promote ourselves on social media and so on. So this time it's so much easier to sell than in the past. Of course, you have to spend time doing it, put the time into it, or hire somebody to do it, but at least it's a lot easier. You can do it all yourself, or you can hire somebody to do it, but it's not, and you can reach, the entire world. You're not limited to the United States, or, you can actually reach a much further afield for your marketing. So, of course, you have to know what you're doing and where to sell. And of course, having your tangible items out there is also good, but I think people are a lot more trusting in that, there was a time maybe at the very beginning when people would be like, oh man, I wish I could hold this piece and feel it before I buy it, that sort of thing. But not anymore. People buy stuff straight up. And of course, if they don't like it, but that's very rarely happens,
Right.
If someone purchases something online, they usually keep it.
Yeah.
So that aspect of the selling and marketing is certainly a lot easier.
Yeah. Are there any online platforms that you found really helpful? Like, do you use anything like, Saatchi, or I don't know what all the other ones are?
Frankly, I have not done a lot of my own marketing work in terms of, we've done some social media stuff, which has worked to some degree. We've sold some pieces online. To be honest, in the last maybe 2 or so years, I haven't really been very, very focused on sales as much as I am now. Right now I'm like totally focused on sales.
Yeah.
But during the, the development of the class programs I run at the studio, I basically just put much of that on hold and just really try to focus on getting the word out and the classes that we offer and the, the other services that we offer at the studio. And, it's been good. It's been worth it in that regard, because up till the pandemic, we were doing very well. We had a lot of interest. There was like at least a month or 2 of wait time to be able to actually do a class with us. It was that busy.
Wow.
And so, so it was a little difficult to focus on sales, on actual sales of, my pottery and stuff. Although I kind of always, just kind of kept it going quietly, but there wasn't like a huge focus, in the last couple of years. But I'm turning the attention more to, a lot to that right now. And so we're kind of going to stepping up production, started to produce some more pieces, and now we're going to put in our online store our website.
Nice.
And we'll most likely actually open up a couple others. We're looking at Etsy and Shopify and,
Yeah, trying to decide which ones to go with.
Yeah. Which ones to go with? They both, especially Etsy, doing a lot of advertising these days and so on. So we have to kind of make that decision pretty soon as to which of them we want to go with.
Yeah, it's like so much managing all of that and trying to figure out what will work best. And
yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I just kind of took a break from teaching anywhere else, so I could actually focus
a
bit more on the project to make the studio a bit more self-sufficient and successful.
Yeah.
So we're just plowing away at it. It's exciting every day to go to work. It's a little concerning right now with what's happening, and we're not really making any money in terms of paying our bills and stuff, so we're definitely struggling in that regard.
Have there been any of the grants or anything? Have you been able to get any of that?
We have applied. We did get a little bit of the PPE, but it was really tiny. I'm not sure why we got just a really small slice that could barely take us through a month. This is just kind of strange. I was like, are you kidding me? But we're grateful. We're definitely grateful. We're not ungrateful at all, because every little bit helps,
Right.
So, we're able to pay for a couple of our assistants, and not me personally. I'm being able to really take any payment.
Right.
But it's all right. That's fine. I'm hopeful that things will bounce back as people become more confident to go out. And that's one of the reasons why I'm focused right now on having enough space so that we can accommodate, because people are certainly still interested. They're coming. We have some small groups coming. Some people will cancel at the last minute because I think they're probably still a little nervous to come out and participate in activities. But it's all good. For the most part, most people seem willing, and they come out and they have a great time. It's we can't stay stuck in the house all the time. The most important thing is protecting ourselves, and we've developed strict safety protocols that we work with. Everyone has to wear their mask. Everyone has to wash their hands with soap before they actually come into our space. In the bathrooms outside. And we have cleanup protocols as well. We space the equipment. After the classes, everyone's responsible for cleaning up their tools, the tools that they use, and their wheel. Give them all the things, all that they need, water and so on. And then they, take it all after they're done, they take their items the items they use, the tools they use to the bathroom, and soap them down and bring them back to us. And then we sanitize everything over again. We use sanitizers and we clean everything up, the entire space, the wheels and the stools and anything that people may have touched, the counters and stuff. Because we have to also make it safe for ourselves, because we're there almost every day. So
all the time.
Yeah. So we do a thorough cleaning after every class. So we try to make it safe for everyone, because we want people to be able to come in and have a great time and relax and not have to worry about picking up stuff. We have places for them to put their stuff. Everybody, everything's separate when they come in. And then when everybody leaves, we sanitize everything. So that's the new normal.
Yep. This new world we're in.
And we're cool with that. We're just, doing what we have to do.
Yeah. Well, amazing that you're able to be back to offering classes there, and hopefully it keeps picking up and
we actually
sustains you guys.
Yeah. And we're thinking about, actually, we're in the process of doing, or we've been exploring, but now we're actually going to do it. We're going to do some virtual classes as well.
Oh, yeah.
One of our instructors had moved to the south to her family's home there. And she's willing to do some teaching from there, because she'll be there for a few months still.
Yeah.
So she'll do some instructing from the South where she is now. And I'll probably do some myself. And
nice.
We have another instructor. So we're kind of getting into it, and we want to see if, it's kind of like being done a lot these days, in so many different ways. So it's becoming pretty normal for people to do things like that. It's going to be difficult. Of course, we won't be able to do the wheel. We'll be able to do more hand building projects.
And then will you send out like clay kits or just a list of supplies? Or
we'll send out a kit.
Nice.
It'll just make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
So we'll send out a kit of with some clay and some basic tools, and suggest other things that they can use at home to substitute.
Yeah.
And then we'll give them the option to bring their finished pieces to the studio.
Oh, nice.
So we can fire them up. Yeah. So people who are local will have that option to come and drop their pieces off. Of course, they can't really be shipped, although it can be shipped, especially if it's shipped while the pieces are still a little moist. If anything happens, we can probably patch them back together and join them up again.
Yeah.
So we're exploring all of those possibilities and just trying to be flexible and adjust to the times, because it's just when things change, you have to adjust and change as well, so you don't perish.
Yep, absolutely.
You gotta go with the flow.
Yeah.
You're being like water now.
Yes, you're flowing.
Flowing. Yeah.
Well, starting to wrap up.
Okay.
Some get to know you questions. Is there anything you're kind of curious about that you've been thinking about lately?
Yeah. I've been very curious about not being in the city anymore. Being out in the mountains somewhere.
Yeah.
I guess it's understandable, right? With all that's the pandemic and all that. I love nature, and I have this serious affinity for being in nature and around nature. I've been having a big urge to just like flee the city. Go to some mountain retreat somewhere and stay there and do pottery.
Yes.
But it's not quite realistic right now.
Right.
But yeah, that's why I've been thinking about that a lot.
Yeah.
At the same time, when I pop back into reality, I'm also really excited to be continuing to embark on this project.
Yeah.
With the studio project and doing these classes and producing these pieces that I have in the back of my mind to produce and so on. So
yeah, maybe you just need like a week retreat or something.
Yeah, maybe that's exactly what I need.
Do a residency.
Yeah, I need to get to the mountain. That's exactly what I need.
Yeah. Or get your online classes going and go away and teach a class from the mountains.
Exactly. From the mountains. Yes. Exactly. That's part of the plan, actually.
Yes. That's so nice.
You can do it remotely.
Yes.
Yeah. It's funny because it's something I've always thought about. I've always thought about for a while now how I could create my life so that I can do just that, teach a class from the beach, or from the mountains,
Yeah.
And it seems like it's becoming more and more possible. I was sometimes a little envious of my friends who were able to do that, like work remotely from anywhere. With pottery, it just almost always seemed impossible. I was like, geez, I wish I could do that,
Yeah.
But now it just seems like it's so possible, right? It's just amazing. You just have to live long enough and
it all changes.
Changes, and things that you thought were impossible actually becomes possible. So lessons of life.
Yeah. Another just kind of fun question. What's your go-to order at your favorite restaurant?
My go-to order. Wow. One of the things I love I love this restaurant in the city that serves a variety of vegan and vegetarian meals. And they have this really amazing Mexican fiesta platter.
Ooh.
That for many years I loved. I wouldn't take it every single time, but like almost every other time. It's kind of like comfort food for me.
Yeah.
Or in the summertime, I love their Middle Eastern platter. They do these platters with variety of foods and so on. Yeah. So those are two of my favorites at that particular restaurant. Of course, being from the Caribbean, is nothing like finding a good Caribbean restaurant that features all the comfort foods that I grew up with.
Yeah.
And so it depends very much on where I am and the restaurant, my mood and all that. But yeah, those are some of my favorites. A good vegan Mexican meal or a good Middle Eastern platter, which are usually always vegan as well. And of course, my Caribbean food.
Yum.
Ital stew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Making me hungry now too.
I know.
Is there anything else that you would want to share?
Well, for young artists who would like to become teaching artists, I think it's a great way to maintain your hands in art, because it can be challenging when you come out of art school, get out of art school, you graduate. Some people are lucky enough to start teaching, but very often a lot of artists have to usually do a little teaching or probably take a side gig in order to be able to pay the bills. So being a teaching artist is a really great way to actually help to maintain yourself, support yourself, and also to be able to create your own art as well.
Yeah.
If you're not fortunate to have your own studio, it also allows an opportunity for that, because very often some of the places or most of the places where you can teach, if you negotiate well, you may be able to actually use that space as well to create. And I always suggest making that part of your negotiation. If you don't have a studio of your own to work, sometimes maybe just volunteering and doing things to assist in that space will usually afford you the ability to have some workspace as well. And just try, and it's difficult sometimes. It's very difficult to sometimes, even with the best intentions, because I remember experiencing that myself to some degree. Sometimes my goal for teaching was partly to maintain my practice, maintain myself, but also I always found it very inspiring. I always got inspired by kids or whoever else I'm teaching. It sort of helps me reinforce my techniques, and in the process of observing my students, sometimes I'd get inspiration to actually do certain things. May just be something simple that they create in their process, maybe a particular design technique, texture, pattern, just in discussion. Sometimes, ideas pour through that inspire my own work.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest benefits from teaching is being inspired by your students. I'm very often inspired by my students in the process. I think teaching has actually helped me improve and enhance my techniques. And because sometimes in your practice, you never really think about some techniques until you have to teach it to somebody else.
Right. Yeah.
And in the process of teaching it to someone else, you realize, geez, I could have done this so much easier by doing it this way, because the way I'm doing it, it's a little difficult to teach it or transfer it to someone else. But in the process of thinking through it and thinking of how I can actually help someone, utilize this technique, I may have to change certain things about it. And in the process of changing it actually helps myself. I developed, for instance, throwing techniques on the wheel that came about through my teaching process, having to teach, especially younger kids, how to work on the wheel. You have to come up with really very easy, basic hand positions to help them accomplish the same goal. And ultimately, those techniques, I end up actually using them myself. They actually become a part of my practice. From the realization of transferring it or translating to whatever age group that I have to translate it to. In the process, I actually learn that I can actually do it a lot easier or better by doing it the way I teach it. So I'll just very often stick to it, just keep it.
Right.
Yeah. So that happens quite a lot. You can be inspired by your students. Of course, your students are going to be inspired by you, but you learn a lot. It's really amazing how much you learn from your students in the process, especially after they've developed some skills of their own. Yeah. The inspiration goes both ways.
Yes. And I love too that idea that you're, developing your techniques and sort of refining them to make them simpler for students, but then it's also like you're refining it for yourself as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like that was all very inspiring. And
well, thank you.
Yeah,
inspiring for me too, because I got me thinking a little bit more about some of those ideas.
Yeah.
My mind has been a hotbed of business and and money lately.
Yeah, well, so it kind of has to be sometimes.
I know. Right, exactly. Yeah, but I try not to spend too much time there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great, but of course I have to, right? Because dealing with business. So this conversation was certainly inspiring in that sense for me as well.
Yeah,
got me thinking about art some more.
Good. Oh, I love that. Is there anyone that you would want to thank or give like a shout out to?
Well, my family, of course, for being patient with me. And just all the artists out there who are doing their struggle and doing their best to keep making art. And I know from my experience that it can be a bit challenging, sometimes paying the bills if things are not quite falling into place just yet. But you just have to be patient. Of course, all the people who have supported us at Brooklyn Clay Industries for the last 3 or so years, we're very, very grateful. I'm certainly grateful for that. Yeah, and just my friends who have been really supportive for helping me get things going when we had a little, what we call a little mastermind of friends that would sort of gather and discuss, and plan. So, my mastermind.
That's amazing. That's great. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, they know who they are. And I really appreciate their support and their help. And certainly my family for helping out as well. Because every so often I drag them to the studio and have them, assist with clean up or set up or whatever it is.
Oh, yes. And final thing, where can listeners connect with you online?
Yes, we're at brooklyn-clay-industries.com. We're also on Instagram at Brooklyn Clay Industries, where we have a Facebook page also. You could either find us with that at Brooklyn Clay Industries or my name, Reuben King. And I think we do a lot more with Instagram and our direct website. That's where our focus is really these days. So that's usually where people can connect, or they can, of course, give us a call at 301-395-0143. That's usually actually a direct or mobile telephone number where there'll always be someone on the other end. So, so if people want to connect, you can either do it through our website or through Instagram or by calling us.
Awesome. And I'll link to that as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Reuben. It was really great talking with you again and getting to hear more of your story.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's really nice to connect with you. And thanks a lot for thinking of me, calling me up to do this.
Yes.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
I loved hearing how teaching helps Reuben refine his process and how students inspire him. He spoke about working with students who needed art and how moving it was to see them process some of the challenges they were dealing with in life, express their emotions, and find moments of joy. I saw a connection to his current work where he's using images on the clay to process and express what's going on in the world right now, the protests, the brutality against Black people, and the pandemic. I'm excited to see this work that's been incubating. Reuben actually shared a sneak peek, which you can see on our blog, and keep an eye on his site and Instagram for updates.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can reach me at Teaching Artist Podcast on Instagram or teachingartistpodcast@gmail.com. Who do you want to hear from? Please share your recommendations of teaching artists. And if you loved this episode, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow me It really makes a big difference. Thank you.